So anyway, why don't we move to the next slide and some background here. So this is a little hard to see on this slide, but I'll walk you through some highlights here. This is a bit of an executive summary, if you will, of findings. And so this is a place where if you wanted to pick up the report and see what the overall conclusions were, this page would get you pretty close. And so I'll kind of navigate you through a few things here. You'll see some different colors on the map. Yellow and kind of an orange and a red. And the way that this worked out, and SFEI was able to organize the findings by looking at different regions of the Delta or areas. And you'll notice these are, they're not specific points, they're kind of broad regions. They're in three categories. And so the yellow represents where there's existing quality habitat that we know could support, or we think would support salmon rearing. And there's opportunities to build on that habitat, right? Where there's already good habitat, if you can enhance that and build on that, we think that's a wise investment. And so the areas you see in yellow represent those. And there are three main areas up in the kind of North Delta Arc area, Cache Lou, and then over around the Casumnas area. And both of those are important because they're connected or adjacent to floodplain areas that we know are important rearing habitat. So as the salmon migrate down, it makes sense that they can move into tidal areas that are in close proximity there. So those are two reasons why those are on the map as good opportunities to enhance. And then down here at the confluence, there's some really good wetland complexes and habitat down there. And because it's such a central point on the migration path for out migrating salmonids, whether they're coming out of the Sacramento or the San Joaquin, then that becomes really valuable also. Moving on to the orange colors you see, those are areas where we think they're probably important for salmonid rearing, but there's a variety of reasons they could really use some help. So for example, these areas, this area D here, I think it's D, sorry, I guess that's an F. But it's along the main stem of the Sacramento. And so we know all the juveniles, unless they go into the YOLO, are coming down through there, and there's not very good habitat there for rearing. And so that's an opportunity to enhance that habitat. Similarly, in the South Delta, we know there's a lot of issues with the habitat, but again, it's a migration core. It's where the San Joaquin runs would have to come through. And then there's a few other areas. This area along the lower Sacramento is identified as another area where there's not necessarily great habitat, but there's this opportunity to provide more connectivity and spacing. So if the fish are coming down, say from Cache and YOLO, and they're making their way, there's a kind of in-between area where there's just not a lot of good habitat. So if you can fill in those spaces, it seems like a wise thing to try to do. So those are some of the orange areas where there's opportunities to really restore some habitat. And then there's these red areas, and really there's just this one in the Central Delta. And that just means there's a need for further research to really understand what might be possible there, and maybe more data collection. The Central Delta obviously is a challenge because of the subsidence, but there are remnant marshes in there and some real opportunities for salmonids. But there's also some concerns about risk associated with getting directed into the pumps and other hazards, predation and the like. So that's kind of a big question mark where we really could use better information, and we wouldn't necessarily recommend investing a lot of money into restoration without that additional information. Last but not least, it's a little hard to see in this map, but there's these little triangles that have exclamation points on them, and those are like hazard areas, if you will. Like, we really probably don't want to encourage drawing fish into some of these areas because we're putting them into an area where we know that there's the potential to get routed to the pumps, which is not the greatest outcome necessarily. So that's probably enough on that. There's descriptions of each of these 10 areas on here and why we think that they would be areas, to invest or not. So maybe we'll go to the last slide and then I'll stop talking and leave a little time for questions, I guess, Campbell, if folks have them. So this slide just highlights a few next steps. This was, a step along the way. There's always more to do. We really want to make the mapping that was done as part of this report more accessible. I didn't highlight any of that mapping except for the general overview map in this presentation, but there are some really nicely prepared maps that look at a whole variety of different habitat characteristics. And they're done in a way that you can zoom into the different areas and really understand that if you were a project proponent and you were planning a project. And so we think those are really valuable, but we need to get them more accessible. And so we're working on that. This second item there is partly why I'm here. We're trying to do this with other groups too. It's just elevate awareness and make people aware that these resources are available. Sorry for that background. And then there's some more work to do on kind of trying to map some of these more dynamic characteristics around velocity and hydrodynamics and shoreline conditions, areas where we really could use some more information. And so we're looking at, ways to generate that. And then item 4, I think you probably all are well aware that, we talk a lot about concerns about predation and contaminants, but we really need to understand those stressors a little bit better and how we can reflect them in this kind of work. So Campbell, I'll stop there. That was a lot to share and see if folks have questions.
Thank you, Bruce. That was great.
Great. Yes, it was. Am I on? Yeah. So board members, comments, questions for Bruce? Great work. We all love salmon. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that was obviously I haven't read the full report, but that was a great summary. I think there's a lot of valuable information there, and I hope that it can be used down the line. Thank you for that, Bruce, and great to see you again, too.
Yeah, thanks, Leo.
And I'll just quickly reiterate that report is actually linked in our Cycle 5 grant guidelines. And so anyone who would be doing or contemplating that type of work, we would want to see in their application that they've very clearly gone back and linked to that report and utilize it in demonstrating their understanding of best available science and the value that their proposed project might provide.
Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll just say thank you again to all your board members, Campbell, for your support. I really think this is a great example of, again, of people working together, building our information base so that, our investments are better made.
Thanks, Bruce.
Great. Thank you so much. Is there any public comment or questions on this item? And Martha's doing her fabulous shaking again. Thank you again, Martha. All right, we're going to move on to item 11, and Campbell's going to give this. It's the Delta Conservancy Strategic Plan Update for 2022 through 2027.
Okay, at the last board meeting, we talked about this briefly, and I promised a bit more of a in-depth update. It is time to develop our 2022 through 2027 strategic plan. Our legislation required that we create a strategic plan. The board determined that we should update it every 5 years. So this is our third update. Our first strategic plan, as you might imagine, a brand new conservancy with a lot of potential authority areas, was a very detailed, very significant document. When we updated it the last time around, we tried to really shrink it down and make it more directly related to what we had learned in the first 5 years about who we are and what we do. And so this will be sort of a continuation of that process. We are hoping to sort of try to bring it up a level and make the goals and objectives a little more higher level so that they don't constrain us and they take into account, potential futures. But also there will continue to be the annual implementation plan, which very directly states all the programs and efforts that the Conservancy is actively engaged in and how those activities directly link to the goals and objectives within this plan. Because this is our third go around, we think that we can do this in-house. And so I want to kind of quickly run through with you the process that we hope will get us between here and January of 2022, when the board will hopefully review and consider a final draft of a strategic plan for that time period. So just to start with, the staff has already met on one occasion to review the existing document and really think critically about, what are the types of changes that we envision. We have 2 more work sessions planned where we're going to be really diving into what we think the goals and objectives ought to be, some may just be minimally adjusted. We know we will add some new ones, but we're going to be working through that. The expectation is that at our May board meeting, we will bring to the board sort of a subset summary of all the things that we anticipate changing, more specific, anything that we would envision being new or different in this strategic plan, and then getting board feedback on those changes. We would then incorporate that feedback into an initial draft, and we would bring that draft to the board at the July meeting. And we would create some extra time at that meeting to have sort of a bit of a workshop session so that we're sure that we can, we've got time to really kind of look very carefully at those goals and objectives and get feedback from the board on those as well. We would then incorporate all of that information and feedback into a public draft. We would bring a public draft to the board in October and ask them to approve that. And if approved, we would then post that document for a public review period. At the end of that review period, we would consider all those comments that we receive, make any alterations to the draft that were required, and we would hopefully again bring a final draft of the document to the board in January 2022, hopefully for consideration of adoption at that point. So that's the overarching process. Again, I think our expectation is to try to make it even more concise and more directly relevant. We'll continue to have an implementation plan that will also be adjusted accordingly, but it will be the document that much more specifically talks about all the activities of the Conservancy and how they link to the goals and objectives in the strategic plan. And we hope to have it all to you in a final draft in January of 2022. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments for Campbell? Any public comment on this item? There's Martha. Hi, Martha. All right, then we will move on to item 12, which is the Delta Stewardship Council update. Do we have Amanda?
Yes.
There she is. Good morning, Amanda.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Mitchoff, and good morning, everyone. So I just have a couple of updates before I turn it over to Dr. Jessica Rudnick, who's going to talk about her new role as the social science extension specialist at the council. So first, the Delta Stewardship Council is meeting tomorrow. We have our monthly board meeting tomorrow. The agenda includes an update from DWR and the Central Valley Flood Protection Board on the development of the 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update. And then we're also going to have a briefing from the Commission, from Eric, on the recently completed 2020 Recreation and Tourism Chapter update to the Economic Sustainability Plan. And that meeting starts at 9. We do have closed session first, so I think we'll be getting going around 9:45 tomorrow morning. And then the second thing I want to mention is that the Bay Delta Science Conference is April 6th through the 9th. And this is a conference that the council hosts with the USGS every other year. And it's really a good way for us to provide new information and synthesis on to kind of the broad community of folks in the Delta, scientists, engineers, resource managers, and stakeholders about kind of best available science and the science that's happening. And because this conference is all virtual, it really lends itself to attending the workshops that really fit with your schedule and are of most interest to you. And this year we are having more things focused on social science. So I encourage you to, if you've got some spare time the week of the 6th through the 9th, to tune in if you can. The workshop is also free, or the conference is also free this year because it is virtual. So it's a great opportunity to kind of to participate just here and there if you can. So now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Jessica Rudnick, who joined the council in December as the first California Sea Grant and Delta Stewardship Council Social Science Extension Specialist. And I'll let Jess kind of introduce herself a little bit more and then talk about kind of how her work plan is shaping up and how she's hoping to engage with the Conservancy moving forward.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here. And I appreciate the time to join and introduce myself and provide a bit of an update on social science advancement in the Delta. As Amanda mentioned, I'm the new California Sea Grant Extension Specialist. I'm housed at the Delta Stewardship Council. And Sea Grant is a federally funded program through NOAA that has that funds applied research around coastlines and estuaries, but also has an educational program and a team of extension specialists that I'm now a part of that work to connect communities and agencies with relevant research at universities. So I started in December, as Amanda mentioned, and I'm in this fun learning phase and getting to make the virtual rounds of the Delta agency meetings and meet different boards. So I'm happy to be here. I figured I would share just a bit about my background, how I'm looking at the need for social science in the Delta, and then a few of the sort of early projects that we're starting to get underway. So my background is really interdisciplinary in environmental social sciences, focused on understanding more human behavior and environmental governance. I completed my master's and PhD at UC Davis in the Center for Environmental Policy and Behavior. And my training really pulled from public policy and political science, psychology and sociology, and all of those disciplines give us theories and tools for how to better understand how people make decisions around environmental issues and how governance structures can incentivize cooperation and help to overcome conflict, all of which are very important in the Delta system. A lot of my previous work focused on farmer decision-making, particularly around water and nitrogen fertilizer management, using a variety of tools, surveys, interviews, focus groups. And that work happened both in the legal Delta, as I was funded as a Delta Science Fellow, as well as in the San Joaquin and Sacramento valleys. So I'm very interested to keep building off that work in this new position and both think about the connections of landowners in the Delta and in the Delta watersheds. I also have a very collaborative applied approach to this work and think that it's very important to engage both the state and local government entities, but also communities and organizations working on the ground to ensure that doing this work is relevant and answering questions that people have. So turning into the Delta and sort of how we're thinking about this in the Delta, we know that people are a central part of the system. And yet we have a lot more science on sort of the ecological and natural biophysical sides of the Delta. We know a lot about fish population dynamics and invasive species movement and flood models, but we really don't know a lot from a scientific perspective about how Delta residents feel or perceive different environmental problems, what the incentives or barriers might be to increasing cooperation across public and non-governmental and private industry actors who are all working to manage land in the Delta, or say who the trusted information sources are for Delta farmers, and in that way, who might be influential in sort of motivating changed land management practices, which I think is essential to the Conservancy's work and a lot of what you all are trying to do. So understanding these human components is really what we're trying to build a social science system to be able to better do and support. The Delta Stewardship Council has been working to figure out how to address this gap of social science in the system for the last couple of years, which included convening a social science task force in 2019, which was a panel of social scientists from across the country who were sort of developing a strategy for how to implement more social science in the Delta system, pulling from other places like Puget Sound and Chesapeake Bay and other estuaries that have and face similar challenges, and how we can learn from the work they're doing there. So that social science task force produced a final strategy report in 2020, which included a set of recommendations, and the hiring for my position was really one of the first outcomes from that report, with the goal being that my work will start to identify ways to operationalize those goals and start implementing projects that seek to build more social science in the Delta. So I'm focusing my work on 3 main goals right now. The first being to build better capacity for social science in the Bay Delta, which starts with building a community of social scientists and practitioners that can work collaboratively together with agencies and relevant public partners to carry out this work. The second is to help facilitate that community to actually do more collaborative and coordinated research that seeks to answer the questions that are relevant right now in various policy spaces. And then the final goal is to figure out how we move that research and apply it in how it informs management and policy going forward. So I just wanted to highlight that we're kicking off this Bay Delta social science community at the Bay Delta Science Conference, which Amanda just mentioned, coming up in April. We're organizing a networking event on April 7th in the afternoon that will be available through the conference platform and open to anyone interested in joining. So please join if you're compelled to do so, but we're going to be talking about what this community can take on, what social scientists in the system are thinking are the key questions, and how we can facilitate a collaborative, coordinated science venue that's really focused on the human dimensions of the system. I also wanted to just highlight a couple other projects where we're starting to infuse more social science. And these are highly coordinated across the Delta sister agencies. So one is thinking about how we integrate more understandings of human decision-making and behavior into the Delta Adapts climate change project. I think it's really essential for us to understand how Delta residents perceive climate change risks and how those perceptions might influence their behavior or willingness to engage with different adaptation approaches. The second is a focus on equitable public participation. So I heard Campbell mention earlier this effort to do more coordination across the Delta sister agencies. And that really starts with understanding what communities are being asked to participate and what their capacity to do so is. And if there's a way that at the agency level, we can better address barriers to participation and make sure that we're getting representative participants at various venues and engaging in different projects. And that relates to the third focus, which is around environmental justice and disproportionate impacts of environmental problems on certain communities. And so I'm really looking forward to helping with this JEDI effort around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and thinking about how, as the coordinated effort across agencies can help to build the environmental justice project that the council is just beginning to start, and how we sort of do that in a regionally coordinated way. So that's what I have to share. I'm happy to take any questions. I'd love to hear thoughts from you all on what the key priorities around human and social components in the system are. And I look forward to continuing to be here and learning more from you all and getting to know you all better. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Comments or questions by board members for Jessica? Jim.
Yes, well, I'm really glad to have you working on that, because social science has been a part of this from the beginning, whether we study it and think about it or not. And actually being aware of it and engaging in it is really important. I think will help us avoid some of the barriers we faced in the past. I'm particularly interested in environmental justice and how we might, through all of our projects, continue to promote an environmental justice approach.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else? And Martha, do I get that famous head shake? I do. I'm calling for public comment and she's giving me the head shake. So moving on, thank you both Amanda and Jessica. We're going to move on to Eric Vink, our Delta Protection Commission update, item 13. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Chair Mitchoff, and good morning, board members. Just a few things I wanted to report on. Our commission met last week, and we had a very interesting presentation from the Delta Water Master, Michael George. His presentation focused on Delta drought preparedness. We are, as you all are well aware, we have had a dry winter, and it doesn't appear that March will deliver a miracle. Maybe April will deliver some alliteration that will get us out of this dryness that we're experiencing. But Michael talked about preparing for drought this year. And drought even affects the Delta. Of course, it primarily affects areas that depend on exports from the Delta, but we have our own experience when there's little water in the system. And so that's something largely around the water reporting that is required. But of course, a great concern that we will have in the Delta is whether there's sufficient water quality, enough water coming through the system to ensure favorable water quality for everything that relies upon it in the Delta region, beginning with agriculture and extending. We talked a little bit about, provided an update on the Delta National Heritage Area, and we have kicked off the work of our advisory committee. We want to thank Deborah Kustik for representing the Conservancy on that advisory committee. That group met earlier this month and will really be taking off on their work as we proceed forward. Our commission adopted the update of the Recreation and Tourism chapter to the Economic Sustainability Plan. Board members might be aware the Economic Sustainability Plan was a requirement out of the 2009 legislation, both the amendments to our Delta Protection Act and also the Delta Reform Act that of course created the Conservancy. But the 2009 legislation directed the commission to prepare an economic sustainability plan for the Delta, which the commission did in 2012, and then to review and if necessary, update that on a 5-year schedule. We're a little late on the 5-year schedule. We have initiated and completed a review of the agricultural section of the ESP, recognizing agriculture as the most significant contributor to the Delta economy. And then in 2009, our focus moved to the recreation and tourism component of the Delta economy, which is the second most important component in the Delta economy. And that work has concluded with a draft update of the Recreation and Tourism chapter. Our commission adopted it last week. I think what's relevant for the Delta Conservancy is that we talked with our commission last week about implementing the recommendations in that chapter update. That's something that we will want to be working with the Delta Conservancy on, with the Delta Stewardship Council as well. And what we will work on initially is to prioritize the constraints that were identified, and they are substantial constraints. We have a Delta recreation economy that has declined since 2012. Tourism is a little bit of an uptick, primarily agritourism, but the traditional boating recreation economy, the marinas that service it, have been in decline since 2012. And so the report identifies what some of these constraints are, areas that might be a focus for further work. And that's something that we want to work with not only our fellow Delta agencies, but also other agencies that have an important role to play in this, beginning with state agencies and extending all the way down to local and even private groups in the Delta. So that'll be our focus moving forward on the implementation of the Recreation and Tourism chapter update. The Commission's been working, focusing on broadband as an initiative. We want to position underserved Delta areas for what we think will be state and federal funding coming down the pike to improve broadband and internet connectivity. and we certainly have some grave deficiencies within the Delta region. And then finally, the commission also is working on updating our strategic plan. Our plan is called Vision 2030. It was adopted 5 years ago, and we are reviewing it, proposing edits to that, adding some new strategic objectives that didn't either weren't identified or didn't make the cut in 2015, but that we feel are now critically important for the commission's work. So more to come on that. We too have initiated an internal process, and then we'll be taking it out to get some external review and feedback on that. So that's what I wanted to report. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
And, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Appreciate that. And I remember dealing with the economic sustainability report on several occasions as an alternate there. I wonder, what are the next steps then now that you'll be completing this report for economic sustainability?
Well, specific to the recreation and tourism chapter, it really is moving into a implementation phase. There were recommendations, actually recommendations identified in 2012, many of which are still relevant, and they're recommendations that we have not made a lot of, accomplished a lot of progress on since 2012. So we have our own ideas at the commission of what might be the most fruitful of those recommendations to move forward on. But I think more importantly, we want to convene together with the appropriate entities that can play a role in advancing these, and determine jointly what are the most promising and the most fruitful for advancing initially, and then just to continue to make progress on those moving forward. I don't have the specific list in front of me currently, but we do believe there are some lower hanging fruit on this list of recommendations that would make the most sense to focus on initially. And then there's more challenging items such as channel siltation and waterway channels. And so the whole issue of dredging in the Delta, which is enormously complicated, but might also be aided by an effort that the Delta Water Master has kicked off in the South Delta that convenes a larger group of interests, including water exporters who have a lot of interest in seeing Delta channels, especially toward the south end of the Delta, dredged to improve the movement of water toward the export pumps. And of course, everyone in the Delta, whether you're a recreationist or you're a farmer diverting from Delta water channels, are experiencing this issue to some degree. But that's going to be a really very complicated one, and that will definitely require ample collaboration amongst a number of parties for us to make an advance there.
Well, thank you, Eric. Appreciate that.
I could just add too, we really appreciate all the work of the Delta Protection Commission on this, and we're hopeful that our Proposition 68 funds might be actually helpful in addressing some of those low-hanging fruit. And obviously, we're all hoping for future funds from whatever sources that we can all utilize to support those efforts as well.
So, any other comments or questions for Eric? Anybody calling in from the public, Martha? Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Item 14, Delta Conveyance Update, Carrie Buckman. Good morning, Carrie.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Mitchoff. Thanks for having me back to do an update. So a couple of updates on Delta Conveyance. DWR is working to develop the environmental impact report, and the Corps is working to develop the environmental impact statement. Both of these are in the phase now where we're really working hard to move towards the development of these documents. We're largely looking at technical analysis of the potential alternatives to help us identify impacts. In addition to working on the environmental documents, we are proceeding with field activities under the initial study and mitigated negative declaration for soil investigations in the Delta that we completed in 2020. So we had been on a break during the wet season, but the investigations have restarted. And so one of the things that we heard from a number of stakeholders is that people were interested in where we were going to be next. And so what we started is posting a 2-week look ahead map on our public information website. So every week we update it. So it's a rolling 2-week map. So it shows the following 2 weeks so people can see where we are planning to be. I do want to have a caveat that things change. Like we were planning to be in one area last week and then it rained and we weren't able to complete that on the schedule that we had identified. So things do change based on field conditions, but we're trying to give people an update on what we know when we know it. And I know that in the past, people have also been interested on the process to obtain temporary entry permits. And so I did want to bring updated information. So in 2020, we sent out 51 TEPs. 14 of those were signed and 37 were not signed. Either we weren't able to come to agreements or they did not respond. And so those will proceed into a process with the court, or at least the ones that need to proceed will move into a court-ordered entry process, similar to what was identified in past efforts. So we've now started with phase 2. And so we've sent an additional 31 letters out to landowners, but they were just sent. So at this point, it's too early to know the fates of those temporary entry permits. So moving on to another topic, DWR conducted a survey last year at the end of 2020 to collect information on low-income, minority, and other underserved communities and how they rely on resources in the Delta. We're really looking forward to having this information as a way to understand how these communities use this information or use these resources and use that as something that helps us in our EIR to assess the potential for environmental justice impacts associated with our project. So we are still compiling the information from the survey. There was quite a bit of data, and we are hoping that we will be able to present that in April to our stakeholder engagement committee. And if you are interested, we'd like to come back and have that information at the next meeting here as well. And then one other item to mention, we are working to develop a community benefits program. The community benefits program would consider ways to protect and enhance the cultural, recreational, natural resource, and agricultural values of the Delta. And that would be a part of the Delta Conveyance Project to try to help. It would be on top of environmental mitigation. And the idea is that it would help help address some of the impacts that are not necessarily captured within the CEQA and environmental permitting processes. So to help develop that, we've been working to coordinate with the community on that. So we conducted one-on-one interviews in February and March to collect information. And now we have workshops planned in April and May to try to reach a broader audience and obtain more feedback. So the workshops are on April 14th, May 6th, and May 25th in the evening from 6 to 8 p.m. And then we've also planned a special tribal meeting to reach out to tribal communities, and that is on May 17th. So those are my updates. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions for Carrie or comments? I'm not seeing any. Campbell.
Carrie, I wonder if you just want to mention the schedule for the EIS-EIR when the public drafts might be available.
Sure, we're still a ways from a public draft. So at this point, we're looking at public draft documents in April or May of 2022.
Thank you. Anything from our public, Martha? All righty, then we will move on. Thank you, Carrie, for the report. 15, Eco Restore update from Charlotte Biggs. There she is. Good morning, Charlotte.
Good morning, Chair Mitchoff and board members. Thanks again for having me today to provide a quick update on Eco Restore. So at your last meeting, I reviewed highlights of Eco Restore projects from 2020. Projects that had started construction or completed construction. And so today I'm just going to do a quick look ahead at 2021 and projects that we're hoping will start construction this year or be completed this year. And then I'll keep you up to date on those as we move through the year. So before I get to 2021, I got a suggestion last month. I think it was Supervisor Provenza mentioned that project videos are nice to share. And I mentioned I had one that was going to be done soon for Lower Yolo Ranch in Yolo County. And that project video is done and it's just 2 minutes. So I think we were going to start with that if Justin had that ready to go. And there is audio for that. And then I'll just run through some quick highlights. Thanks, Justin, or James.
Lower Yellow Ranch is a 2,000-acre property that we're restoring to tidal action for Delta smelt. This project is in Yolo County in the Cache Slough complex, and so that's a region of the Delta where the elevations are such where it's considered intertidal.
This particular project will be restoring habitat for the benefit of fish species as well as other land-based species, Swainson's hawk, giant garter snake, the Delta smelt, and the salmon that visit this area in the north part of the Delta.
This is a project that has been in planning for more than 12 years, and it's a project on which numerous federal, state, and local agencies have collaborated. Westlands bought this property in 2009 because it was identified as an ideal location for restoration of tidal marsh habitat.
So when we take a piece of property like Lower Yellow Ranch and flood it with water, it's just deep enough to make the right kind of food that will support Delta smelt.
We're trying to increase the tidal inundation of this piece of property. And so we're deepening this, what used to be an irrigation canal, so we're making it a little bit deeper. But before we can do the excavation, we have to rescue the fish that are in the canal. And so we're taking the water out, so it makes it easier to rescue the fish. Once all the fish have been rescued, then we'll bring the excavator in and we'll start making the channel deeper.
The State Water Project and the Central Valley Project are large water delivery systems that benefit millions of Californians in the state. But additionally, we want to be good stewards of the environment in the work we do. And so as we're delivering water from the Delta, it's very important that we also protect the species that live in the Delta.
It takes a village, not just a partnership, to make one of these projects happen. So fortunately, we had really great support from the Department of Water Resources, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, NOAA Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Central Valley Flood Protection Board, so Natural Resources Agency. So you have a whole lot of people pulling in the same direction.
This is one of a series of projects that's being conducted in this region, all of which are going to be connected and all of which will contribute to the recovery of these species.
This effort is really looking holistically at how do we do water delivery in a sustainable way, in a way that helps the environment and protects the environment and helps the environment recover.
So thank you for showing that. I hope you guys enjoyed that. One of the purposes of EcoRestore is to provide a hub of communication and information. And so on our website, at DWR's website, we have actually 8 videos similar to that one that highlight projects that have started construction. And we try and do that for all the projects as they get to that point. So if we have any more this year, I'll share them here so that you can see them, and anyone interested can check out our website for any others that we have. So I'll just highlight a couple of projects for 2021. I just got 4, and then take any questions or comments that you guys might have. So the first project I wanted to highlight for this year is Lookout Slough, Tidal Habitat Restoration and Flood Improvement Project. It's actually one of the projects that was mentioned or referenced in the video we just watched, because it's right adjacent to the Lower Yolo Ranch property. And so it's also in the Cache Slough region. So Lookout Slough is a multi-benefit habitat and flood improvement project. And we hope it will break ground either later this spring or summer, but sometime this year is the goal. The project's just working through final permitting and approvals now, so the timeline's always a bit uncertain, but that's our hope. So Lookout Slough is by far the largest tidal restoration project in the Delta to date. The site itself is over 3,400 acres, and the wetland is going to be about 3,200 acres. So it's almost double the size of the Lower Yolo Ranch site we just saw the video on, which is pretty big as well. And so before we create the new tidal wetland area, we will be building a new setback levee to protect the landowners in the area and the agricultural areas in the area. And so that levee is about 2.5 miles and will tie into the existing levee system. So that will be built first and certified, and then we would work to create the wetland area. So the project's at the very lower end of the Yolo bypass. I think I mentioned it's in the Cache Slough region, and it's actually within Solano County. And the site was identified in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan as an area where we should prioritize putting a setback levee to create more capacity in our flood system. The wetland itself is going to provide mitigation credit for state water project long-term operations. And so we're bringing together multiple objectives here and multiple funding sources to make this project happen. It's also a private-public partnership between DWR and ecosystem investment partners. And so we've been working with them for a few years now under contract to work through this project planning and permitting. And one of the moving parts right now is that DWR is actually taking ownership of the site. So we will own the site and we will maintain the site in the long term, working very closely with Solano County and other partners in the area. So that's Lookout Slough. The second project I wanted to highlight, it's actually two projects, Arnold Slough and Bradmore Island. They're in the Sassoon Marsh area. So they're two adjacent projects that will be constructed together, and they were also permitted together. And together, these two sites create about 700 acres that will be transformed. Currently, they are managed seasonal wetlands, and they'll be creating a tidal wetland, all year round tidal wetland in those two areas to restore them for the benefit of Delta smelt and other native fish species. So the project team is just working through final permitting on that project now. DWR is the owner of the site and will be leading construction. So we'll need to go out to bid, and that takes a bit of time. So I'm thinking, we're kind of thinking that this will be breaking ground later this summer or early fall kind of timeline. And the project itself will count towards State Water Project long-term operational goals and mitigation. It also counts towards the local Sassoon Marsh regional restoration goals in that area. Third project I wanted to highlight is back in the Yolo County, Yolo Bypass Salmonid Habitat Restoration and Fish Passage Project. It's a mouthful. A lot of times it's referred to as the Fremont Weir Big Notch, and you might have heard it referred to as that before. The project will create new infrastructure at the Fremont Weir to allow juvenile and adult fish to move between the Sacramento River, the floodplain, and the Yolo bypass. So this is this new infrastructure will include a gated notch at the Fremont Weir and new channels. And this is a requirement. It's been in a mandate for a while under the NIMS biological opinion for salmonid, and just overall trying to create more fish passage through the Yolo bypass and address some of the legacy issues there. So the project team is working through final permits now, and as well as some real estate agreements with landowners in the bypass. This project's been in the works for many years. I know a lot of you have been involved in this probably in different ways. There's been a lot of outreach and involvement of the landowners and stakeholders in this process, and some of the interests of those landowners and stakeholders have been incorporated in the final design, including the dates in which the bypass would be inundated. So all that's sort of been taken into consideration through a lot of outreach and collaboration. So the project team's hoping that they'll be able to start some vegetation clearing in the fall of this year. So it's sort of like pre-construction work, and then the real construction of the site and the infrastructure we're hoping will start next spring. So again, everything's a little uncertain when it's in planning, but that's the timeline we're hoping for right now on the Fremont Weir. So the last project I wanted to highlight, and I've mentioned this one before because it's been under construction for a while, is Dutch Slough Tidal Restoration Project. So this is a 1,200 acre site in Contra Costa County. It's between Big Break and Jersey Island. This is a historical wetland that was converted to pasture, and it had some subsidence there. And so DWR was able to take ownership and start planning with many, many partners to create a tidal wetland restoration area on the site. Construction actually began in fall 2018. So it's been under construction for a few years. So far, that construction work has involved moving almost 3 million tons of earth to create, to elevate the marsh plain, because it was subsided, so it needed to actually be elevated. And then we created channels that will be used for the tidal wetland and for the fish to move through the site. There's also a revegetation work that happened last year, and that actually helped stabilize the soil before breach. So we needed some time for that to take before the breaching would take place. So we are planning to breach the site this fall. There's actually going to be 5 breaches in the existing levee. And we're hoping if if our numbers are good, we can actually have maybe some folks out on the site and do a breaching ceremony. So we're hoping to plan that, and I'll keep you posted on that if we're able to do that. Post-construction, the site's gonna, provide habitat for fish and bird and other wildlife, of course, but it's also envisioned as a living laboratory. U.S. Geological Survey researchers will be able to study the effects of varying marsh plains. So we sort of designed it to be studied and learn from it to try and help us find the more ideal elevations for marsh and what the effects of that are. So we're really looking forward to students and USGS being able to study the site. They're also going to study it for carbon cycles and that type of information. So this project it's a restoration project that was done not for mitigation, it's just for restoration, and it was funded through many different partnerships and funding sources, including some grants and other partners as well. So we're excited to see that one come to be complete. And I guess just to finish where I started, we do have a video on Dutch Slough because it started construction in 2018, but we'll probably do some more outreach when we are ready to breach and share video footage of that on our website and different things, so others can watch that exciting milestone happen. So that was it for my update today, but I'm happy to take any questions or clarify anything I might have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you for the video. Always nice to see such work being done. Any comments or questions for Charlotte by board members? Yes, Jim, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Charlotte, for your report and also for making that video on the YOLO Ranch. I will show that at a board meeting so that my whole board will see the great progress that has been made. I assume I can just lift it from your website, but if not, if we have a problem with that, I'll contact you. Also, I want to thank you and Eco Restore for working with us on the YOLO Fish Passage project. It's been a challenge because we've had to balance the salmonid interests again and agricultural interests, as well as the interests of the YOLO wildlife area in protecting birds. I think we're close to achieving that, and one of the things that helped partly, as I mentioned earlier, was grant funding for some of the drainage projects and projects to strengthen what we do in the YOLO bypass, and there were a number of grants also from the state that helped, and just the whole cooperative attitude of state and water exporters. So I think we're close to a resolution that will help protect fish and also do it in a way that does not threaten the interests of farming and bird habitat. So that's a tremendous accomplishment, and I thank Eco Restore for all of their efforts, and in general the state for working so closely with us.
Any other comments, questions? Any public comment? No. All right. Thank you again, Charlotte, for that report. We're now moving on to our next to the last item, which is asking for input on our next agenda. Campbell?
Just, we have 4 items identified. We may be bringing additional Prop 68 projects for consideration. The Proposition 1 grant guidelines will come back to the board for final approval so that we can open that solicitation in the summer. We will provide, as I mentioned, a subsequent update on the changes we anticipate for the strategic plan process. We will have a presentation on our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And one thing I heard through today that I thought might be good to add is if the final report is available on the social justice survey that DWR did, I think that would be a really good presentation to consider having at that board meeting. I think there's some really valuable information there. So that's what we've heard. If there's anything else from other board members, anything else that you'd like us to consider including, we're happy to entertain that.
And Campbell and I met on Monday, as we do before, and I'd also like to offer this opportunity to any comments by board members, not just on future agenda items, but if there were any comments, non-actionable items, anything anybody wanted to report or share with their fellow and sister board members. And I'm not seeing any. So we will move on to our last item, which is again calling for public comment on any item not on today's agenda. And Martha, no. All right. So with that, we are adjourned to our next meeting, which is May 26, 2021. Have a good rest of your day. Lovely spring. Pray for more rain. And we'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.
Hey, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
Yes.
This is Jim Waters. I just have a quick comment for you.
Sure. Hi, Jim.
I'm one of your constituents, and I just finished getting both my COVID shots from the Contra Costa Health Department.
Yeah.
I was in and out of the property on DVC within 1/2 hour. Everybody was totally efficient, smart, cooperative. Really a kudo to Contra Costa County. Just wanted you to know.
Thank you, Jim. We're hearing that a lot. And I just want to thank you on behalf of our health services department. They have done a fabulous job. And I'm glad you had such a great experience. And as I jokingly say, we sound like animals. Like, have you had your shots yet? So yes, I'm there and you're there and others. So we're wishing that for the rest of you. I used to be needle phobic, folks, and this thing, you don't even feel it. It's amazing to me how efficient they are, as Jim said. So looking forward to that time that you're all able to get your vaccines. Thanks again, Jim. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.